overwhelming, breathtaking, mysterious. Those who have seen the remains of the ancient fortress city of Sigiriya with their own eyes truly find many words to describe their impressions. In Sri Lanka, situated on the dizzying peak of a huge rock, the mystical site not only opens a vivid window into the past, but also poses a number of tantalizing puzzles for modern researchers. After all, how did people manage to create such an architectural marvel more than 1,500 years ago? And can it really be that forces were at work here that were literally not of this world? As just mentioned, the Sigiriya rock fortress can look back on over 1,500 years of history. And yet, this is only half the historical truth. Archaeological discoveries have revealed that human settlement in the region did not begin with the construction of the fortress, but 3,500 years earlier. In the course of time, in the 3rd century BC to be precise, some Buddhist monks also settled in the surrounding area. But to understand what the time-honored ruins, which were declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1982, are all about, we have to turn the wheel of time forward another 2 centuries. Because although the monolith, around 200 meters high, is not what we would describe as an easily accessible place at first glance, it does have one decisive advantage. It is difficult for enemies to reach, and it provides a perfect panoramic view of the surrounding landscape. But first things first. In 473 AD, King Dahasunena of Anuradhapura had been in power for almost 20 years. Dahasunena's rightful heir to the throne was his son Moggallana, although the ruler had another descendant. However, as Kassapa had been fathered by one of the king's concubines, he had to take second place in the line of succession. But as we all know, human greed for power is sometimes greater than the love of one's own family. And so it came to pass that Kassapa killed his father and then ascended the throne. However, the regicide knew that his deed would not go unpunished. He feared Moggallana's revenge and had a secluded fortress built that was beyond the reach of his half-brother, the rock city of Sigiriya. In the new capital of the empire, Kassapa managed to remain in power for around 20 years before his fate finally caught up with him in 491. His half-brother, who had been exiled to South India, gathered a huge army around him and engaged his father's murderer in a final decisive battle. In the end, Moggallana was victorious. The new king declared Anuradhapura the capital again, and Sigiriya functioned as a Buddhist monastery until the 15th century. After the time of the monks, the king of Kandy was able to seek refuge in the fortress in the event of an emergency. In our western latitudes, however, we have only known of the existence of the legendary rock city since the late 19th century. At that time, British researchers were able to bring the ruins of Sigiriya back to archaeological reality with all their breathtaking contemporary evidence. Of stone lions and revealing images. But why is the site known by the name Sigiriya of all names? Well, there's a very simple reason. This name is derived from Singha Giri, which means nothing other than Lion Rock, and alludes to the colossal guardian that every visitor once had to pass through. In detail, visitors had to pass through the mouth of a stone lion, which at the time was enthroned on a plateau on the northern side of the rock. Today, however, only the paws of the big cat remain, and yet its dimensions still bear witness to the awe-inspiring sight the Lion Gate must have once offered. Furthermore, the imposing gate also gives the idea that Sigiriya was anything but a functional shelter that offered no amenities. In truth, the Lion City was not a desolate place whose everyday life was determined by the fear of omnipresent danger, but a thriving haven of life. Let's just take a look at the impressive Fountain Garden. It still bears witness to the extraordinary skills of its builders and is considered a prime example of ancient engineering. The ingenious system of wells, canals, lakes, and dams ensure that there was never a shortage of drinking water, even in the event of a prolonged siege. But that's not all. Some of these structures still function to this day, and they suggest that the builders of the time were generations ahead of their time. And even if some of Sigiriya's buildings have not managed to withstand the gnawing ravages of time, their remains provide a deep insight into the reality of life for the former inhabitants. Magnificent palaces greeted visitors high up on the rock, but today only the foundations remain. The reason for this is that the magnificent buildings were not made of solid stone, but of wood, which has weathered over time. Less weathered, but all the more wicked, is the case of the so-called Cloud Girls. These are detailed frescoes that line the ascent to the monolith, and are made up of bare-chested women. A contemporary inscription tells us that there were once 500 of these revealing works of art. Today, visitors can still marvel at 22 of them. However, the fact that they were damaged by unknown persons in 1967 shows that not everyone appreciates these irreplaceable testimonies to the times. In the 1970s, the Sri Lankan government then decided to restore some of the Cloud Girls and give them kind of a breast lift at the same time. In fact, some of the nipples were subsequently drawn slightly higher than originally. Incidentally, the 22 preserved frescoes have managed to survive all these centuries as they are located in a particularly protected spot. The corresponding rock niche is situated in such a way that it cannot be reached by the heavy rains. However, anyone visiting Sigiriya and thinking of taking photos of the works of art should be careful, because it is strictly forbidden for tourists to photograph the Cloud Girls. As a rule, graffiti spraying is also strictly forbidden. However, the graffiti that adorns the so-called mirror wall of Sigiriya is not a real nuisance for archaeologists, but an invaluable testimony to the times. It goes without saying that we are not dealing with any urban works of art here, but with the oldest known evidence of Sinhalese poetry ever. Created between the 7th and 11th centuries, the deciphering of the mirror wall also played a decisive role in the research of the Sinhalese language. The content of the graffiti deals with the Cloud Girls, which is also how we know that 500 of the painted beauties once existed. But what does the name mirror wall actually mean? Did a huge mirror hang here hundreds of years ago in which the inhabitants could admire themselves? Well, it wasn't quite like that, but something like that. The name goes back to the fact that the plastered walls were always polished to a high gloss in the days of the king, and thus allowed the ruler to admire his own face. The work of the gods? We have already told you about the background of the construction of Sigiriya. But the bottom line is that the local population has a completely different, far more spectacular version. The Lion City was by no means created by ordinary people, but by supernatural deities. But what is this exciting myth all about? Well, the divine creatures are said to have ascended to Earth from time to time, and in order to have a proper residence here too, they built the imposing complex on the top of the rock. In detail, Sigiriya is said to have been modeled on the home of Kubera, who embodies the god of wealth, merchants, and treasures in mythology. And here's the thing, the Lion City is also said to have once had a magical palace that built a direct bridge between the world of the gods and our own. However, there are many alternative-minded spirits who immediately ring the pre-astronautical bells when they hear this story. In other words, the supposed gods were actually extraterrestrial intelligences, and the magical palace was nothing more than a kind of high-tech portal. But regardless of whether we believe in divine extraterrestrial origins or not, there is no question that Sigiriya is still accompanied by some big question marks. Just as is the case with the Egyptian pyramids, the official history of the site is questioned mainly due to the immense effort that went into its construction. Some people even say that it would have been practically impossible for the people of the 5th century to haul the necessary materials to a height of 200 meters. And while the location is usually attributed to their practical all-around view and inaccessibility to the enemy, we must not forget that there was also a religious connection in this respect. For example, building on mountains or high cliffs often went hand in hand with the idea of being closer to the gods and being able to reach the kingdom of heaven more easily. However, only the former inhabitants of Sigiriya could tell us what this exciting legend is really about. But unfortunately, they no longer have the opportunity to do so. Fortunately, you now have the opportunity to never miss one of our videos again. Feel free to press the like and subscribe button and stay up to date from now on.